Welcome to the Deliverance Project. Here are your hosts, Anthony and Melissa.
Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Deliverance Project podcast. I'm Anthony.
Hello, I'm Melissa.
And we are so glad that you've chosen to join us and spend your time with us tonight. We have what we consider a pretty exciting episode. We have a listener who wrote in with a pretty terrifying story, but we're also going to tie that into one of the topics that we feel we want our listeners to know, and that is the topic of unforgiveness. And so if you happen to have tuned in from an ad we put out with our dog Cuddy, we hope that you will not be disappointed with the paranormal story that will come up later in this episode. So stick around for that. But for now, we are simply going to get to some quick announcements, and then we'll jump right to it. Before we get to the episode, we want to ask you to, again, please join us on all the social medias. You can go to the show notes and find out where we are. You can also go to Melissa's, she's got TikTok, I think Instagram. It's just Melissa Corelli or Corelli Melissa, depending on what you're looking for there. Picture of her pretty face on there, and you will see a lot of the stuff that we post, just our personal stuff, as well as some of the ads and stuff that we put out for the podcast. So you can check us out there. And then, as always, we want to make sure that you are aware of our whole organization. And how you would do that is simply go to the struggleseries.com. That website is going to tell you all about what we do here. So there'll be some information there about the podcasts. We have now made it available where you can buy my first two books, The Struggle and the Sacrifice, at discounted prices there. So if you get them through us, it's a little cheaper than if you get them through Amazon, but you can always find them Amazon, Barnes and Noble, wherever you buy your books. And the third book in the trilogy is still probably a couple months out with the publisher. Those things take a long time, but you can also listen to the Struggle series on a separate podcast called The Struggle Series. You can listen to all three books, including book 3, The Return, which hasn't been released, and you can listen to that for free. So on the website, you can also find information about, the podcasts, the books, what we're about, that type of thing. And we'll be putting some more information out there over the next couple of weeks. So just check in on that every now and then, and you might find some cool, interesting stuff there, in the next couple of weeks that's not on there if you checked it today. So we would just ask that you could do that to support us, and then always subscribe, check the check mark or click the bells for notifications so you can always get reminders of the future episodes. And of course, if you're new with us, we're spitting all this information out as quickly as we can before we jump to the podcast, but we want you to know about us. And if you are somebody who likes to listen to your podcasts on YouTube or Rumble, we actually post the podcast there, actually both podcasts, the Struggle Series and the Deliverance Project, on there. We only, for the Deliverance Project, have a thumbnail, but you can listen to the podcast there. And we are loading episodes with a small video for the Struggle Series there. I think you can make it through probably chapter 10, I think, of book 1.
So, yeah.
And about every other week or so, sometimes with the holidays, we get a little bit behind. We'll be posting a new video for the books. And so you can kind of listen to those there.
Yeah, that's exciting.
All that being said, there is a great story we're going to tell you here in a bit from somebody who has gone through deliverance ministry and has a pretty, I would say, terrifying possession story to tell us. But it's going to tie us in with the topic that we want to cover today. It's one we've covered before, but we're going to dig in pretty deep. And that is the topic of unforgiveness. Now, this is one of those touchy subjects that in my perfect world, we just wouldn't talk about it because
I know it's so hard.
because it pisses people off. Because to tell somebody that if they want relief, whether that's from a demonic possession or whether that's just from emotional struggles, that they have to forgive somebody, you'll send a very kind, nice person into a rage.
Oh, yeah.
And all of us, I think, have been wounded, some of us to pretty severe extents.
Mhm.
And um, it's really the last thing you want somebody to tell you is like, you got to forgive that person.
Mhm.
And obviously with varying degrees of abuse or victimization that
Mhm.
somebody could suffer, it's really not, I would even say it's really doesn't even seem appropriate that somebody would tell you that. However, unfortunately, in what we do in the spirit realm, dealing with deliverance ministry,
Mhm.
unforgiveness can be and will be a huge door for a demon to walk through in order to gain access into your life.
Oh yeah,
And
I
so
agree.
we hope that you hear our hearts. We're kind of laughing. We're looking at each other going, oh, this topic's hard. But it's not that we're telling you what to do. It's that we're saying that if you found yourself in a situation where there's a demonic, oppression or possession going on,
Mhm.
one of the first things as a deliverance minister that I was trained to look for is unforgiveness,
Mhm.
because it's that one thing where the devil can get you to doubt God
Mhm.
very easily.
Mhm.
And Melissa has shared, some personal stories of stuff that's happened to her where she's had to forgive. But Melissa, what would you say, like if you took, and we don't need the definition or the description of it, but if you took the worst thing that ever happened to you in your life that you've forgiven somebody for, how long did that take
Oh
from the
my
event
gosh.
to where you felt like you had released it or released it as much as you can?
Maybe 8 or 9 years.
Yeah.
It took a long time because, like you said, it's something that because you're struggling with what happened and the effects of what happened, and it affects other people. And so you just kind of you're not ready to forgive because you're so wounded and you're so hurt and just devastated from everything. But it took me, I would say, honestly, about 8 or 9 years before I was able to. And I think I've mentioned this before on my episode about my ex-husband. Some
Sure.
things, so it took me a very long time, and I was just kind of like, you know, disappointed, with everything. So I think I was probably holding on to it just because maybe some people feel like if I forgive him or forgive the person, that they're getting away with something. But it wasn't that. It was hurting me even more holding on to the things that, was done to me and not to forgive that person. But once I forgave him truly in my heart, and I forgave him and just turned it over to God, it was the best thing ever happened to me.
Yeah, and that's what we want to get across is it does take time, and there's no set time frame.
Mhm.
There's not, I've literally as a minister had people say, "Well, how long should it take for me to forgive somebody?" And it's like there's no set time frame.
Mhm.
It's there's so many factors that would indicate,
Yeah.
how, if, and when all of that occurs. But as a deliverance minister and somebody who's helped people with, demons for, decades, I'm going to tell you that I would say the vast majority, a very high percentage of people that were dealing with something demonic, like an attachment, a possession,
Mhm.
one element, if not the element, was unforgiveness.
Mhm.
And again, it's like we say, it's like the one area where even good, solid Christian people don't like what God has to say,
Mhm.
because it's like you don't want it to be true that this loving God would tell you to forgive somebody who's wounded you.
Mhm.
You want the God of justice, not the
To
God of
make them suffer.
forgiveness. Yeah. I've heard people say, well, doesn't the Bible say vengeance is mine, saith the Lord?
What goes around comes
Yeah.
around. Eye for an eye.
Well, vengeance is mine, saith the Lord, is telling you to let him have vengeance,
Mhm.
right? Not for you not
Exactly.
to have
Yeah.
it and to dictate. But the simple answer, and this is not meant to speak of anybody's specific circumstance, but the simple answer is we don't want God to forgive others, but we want him to forgive
Forgive
us,
us.
because
Mhm.
we know the circumstances, but it's hard for us to see why somebody would wound somebody. I'm going to tell a little story here just to kind of get going. A pastor that I listen to a lot, somebody who I follow, I believe in a lot of his teaching, would highly recommend his church. And I'm not going to give a name because I don't want to start any feuds or anything, but he was doing a sermon this week, and I don't know when it was recorded. It was something I was watching on YouTube. And he was talking about a certain group of people that he was wishing they would all be dead, that they would all get the death penalty, and he doesn't care. And he started quoting, the verse in the Bible where it says, if anybody harmed children, that it's better for them to have a millstone tied around their neck than to face God. And so he was justifying that with Jesus wants the death penalty for people that harm children in any capacity, trafficking, whatever it is. And I get it. The humanness of that, I get it. And so this is what happens in arguments about religion is people take these extreme circumstances. But see, God is extreme in the other way, which is I either love and forgive everybody who asks or I don't. And so when this pastor was speaking that, he had, in my belief, proof texted or kind of contextually misinterpreted what Jesus was saying. And so anybody who's harmed a child, as humans, we're like, kill them, shoot them, leave them for dead, lock them away forever. That all makes sense. But we can't pick a certain sin and say, well, the Bible says this about it. Well, the Bible also says that when you have sexual immorality, that it's the only sin that's committed against the body. So it classifies these sins. And so somebody who has had sexual immorality in their life will then look at somebody who is, starving and putting their child in a cage and saying that's unforgivable and God should tie a millstone around their neck. But they don't want to look at the part of the Bible that says that the sexual immorality that they committed is a different kind of sin that causes a whole different kind of problem. And so what we can't do is say, well, God wants all these people dead. And that's basically what this guy was saying. And I kind of flinched a little bit because I like the guy and I kind of know and he's kind of an extreme talker. He's like me, he speaks a lot in hyperbole, which, takes it to the extreme for the humor value and stuff. So I have forgiveness for it, but I cringed a little bit because in our world and what we want this podcast to be is, I don't care what you did. And Melissa doesn't care what you did. We've made our minds up that we want a place where that religious stuff kind of disappears. And this guy is not historically a very religious guy, but he just was on a tangent, I guess. So I'm saying all that to say, if you're hearing us and you're struggling already with this topic, just remember that we're not here to judge anybody. And we're also here to hear your story without taking a side of your perpetrator. That's not what we're saying. But what we're saying is you can understand that if somebody, let's say somebody like abducted your child and hid them for a year, and then you got them back from some raid or something, how you could ever forgive that on a human level, I mean, that seems impossible. However, you can see how the devil would say, there can't be a God. Why would God allow that to happen
to your child?
Or you could hear that person say, you've been a good Christian, and, that other person obviously is a demon or doesn't love anybody. So, it's okay to want them dead. An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, like Melissa just said. But remember, in the Beatitudes, Jesus said, you've heard it said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, but I tell you the truth. If somebody smacks you on the left cheek, give them your right. What? Because the paradigm has shifted, because the sacrificial system shifted, because the covenants changed, an old covenant and a new covenant. We call it the Old Testament and the New Testament, but it's really the old covenant and the new covenant. And how things work are different. And so if a devil could tell you there is no God, or God is okay with this or that, what it does is it opens you up.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'll kind of briefly kind of share just a real quick story of a possession case that I dealt with where the person had unforgiveness. And this was a person she had been severely abused by her father. And she was very much what you would expect from somebody who had severe sexual, physical abuse from her biological father. She had no outlet, came out later because it was the mother that had called us at the church to see if we can help. And the mother was, exposed later on that the mother was fully aware of what was going on, but didn't know how to respond because the father was very abusive and very dominant.
Mm-hmm.
And so the daughter had tried to go to the mother on several occasions, and the mother just kind of said, well, that's how he is. And Melissa and I were talking about this the other day, kind of those older people,
Mm-hmm.
that old kind of guard they just brush stuff under the rug, not just
Mm-hmm.
that, but everything.
Mm-hmm.
It was family secrets. You don't tell your secrets out in the world. So, it was just kind of, this is how
Your
life
dad is
is.
really your uncle, but it's okay.
Yeah,
So
but
we'll
but
just.
just don't tell anybody. Yeah, that type of stuff. So
Uh-huh.
this particular young woman had a ton of unforgiveness for her dad, but it was really for her mother. And so what had happened is because her mother, she was like in her 20s, but she was still very incapable of living on her own because she had gotten addicted to drugs. She was homeless for a while. So
Mm-hmm.
her only real safe haven was with her mother, because the mother had eventually divorced the father. And so what the mother and the daughter would do is just bash the dad, but inside, the daughter secretly had more resentment for the mother.
Mm-hmm.
And she felt like she couldn't go anywhere else. So she was still playing that game of, I'm going to pretend like I'm okay as
Like,
long as me
yeah.
and mom are talking about this. Well, of course, mother had become this religious person, and was telling her all the time about Jesus. And the girl really finally said the demon entered her when she, in an angry tirade against her mother, how could you, in her mind she was saying, how could you allow me to be abused like this? And now all of a sudden you have this Jesus, and you're all admonished, or
Mm-hmm.
you've been exorcised of your sins, or though your sins have been wiped clean by this Jesus, but you've never repented to me, and you've never told me you were sorry and made it right with me.
Mm-hmm.
And so she started cursing God, and then eventually became possessed. So we prayed for her. She was willing to accept Jesus because we had, it was about 3 or 4 visits to the home before we even prayed deliverance over her,
Mm-hmm.
just getting her to understand what Christianity was, because the only version of Christianity she knew was from this mother who was all skipping and happy that she found Jesus and had been forgiven, but had never really turned it back to the daughter and said, I'm sorry.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we finally prayed for her, and all of this stuff came out afterwards, because we worked with her for several weeks after, we would go with the ministry team and just pray with them. And the mother was, devastated, because her view of Christianity was, well, I'm forgiven. I don't have to say
Thing.
anything.
Uh-huh.
We're all good. And I'll just keep praying for my daughter. And so we were able to tell him, do you understand that maybe the prayers of your mother led us here and led you to be willing to accept Jesus? But on the same token, mother, you needed to
Mm-hmm.
make amends for what you did. And so this was one of those stories where when we went to the house, Melissa, I could tell you with the straightest face, it's one of those homes, and some of you who are listening right now live in these homes. You can have every light in the house on and every curtain open, and it is dark.
Mm-hmm.
Some of you, if you watch horror movies, they always find these old farmhouses. Like, you go
Yeah.
out in the middle of nowhere and there's this farmhouse, and like it's dark, and
Mm-hmm.
they, cinematically they make it that way, but there are real houses like that. I lived in one,
Mm-hmm.
and I would change the light bulbs to like 100 watts, and it was like
60, 100.
it
Yeah.
would absorb the light.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was definitely one of these. And very quickly, one of our team members, she came and whispered over in my ear and said, I just saw a demon run, kind of from from the living room down the hallway to the kitchen and then turn around and grinned at her. And, you know, some of you listening don't think this stuff happens, and that's fine. But some of us can see these things, and some people have never seen one in their life, and then all of a sudden we'll see one.
Mhm.
So how that spirit vision works, or when they choose to reveal themselves in our realm, I don't really profess to know how all that works, but
Mhm.
some of us tend to see into that realm a little more. I didn't see it, but one of my team members did. And so the daughter then told her, and the demon voice, you know, like you see in the movies, "Did you see me just do that?" And our team member said, "What do you mean?" And she said, "Did you see me just run over there? And now I'm sitting right here." So, of course, the girl was still sitting right there, but the demon was saying, "I was just in her. Then I ran down the hall and now I'm back." Kind of a show of force or whatever.
Uh-huh.
And so as we started to pray, that was one of those crazy
Yay,
ones
yay,
where
yay.
stuff starts rattling on the shelves. We had a candle that lit by itself. It wasn't lit before. It had not been lit for weeks.
Mhm.
And then all of a sudden it lit kind of on the like a little bookshelf that had like the top shelf was not a shelf. It was like the top of a bookshelf, but it was low,
Mhm.
and there was a candle on top with like some other flowers and stuff, and the candle just lit, and it lit big and
Mhm.
then kind of dimmed down. We prayed for her, and the family, you know, kind of lives happily ever after, at least as far as we know. But that's just a brief example of how this stuff can happen. And so you can imagine that it took us several conversations with this young lady to say, you know, this demon that keeps kind of popping in and out of you is feeding on this unforgiveness.
Mhm.
It doesn't mean that your dad deserves forgiveness, and it doesn't mean your mom deserves forgiveness.
Mhm.
But what it means is that Jesus tells us often in scripture to forgive because he understands the damage it can do.
Because you eventually really just have to just forgive them and just move on, because they're not going to say I'm sorry, or they're not going to say that they're wrong, because that's going to open up more things of them having to expose and admit to things. So it's
Sure.
just really for yourself. But once you do it, it's amazing. And it has taught me, you know, moving on in my life and as I'm getting older, that I'm able to forgive people easier. It doesn't take me 9 years down the road. I mean, I was still in my early 30s. I'm in my mid 50s now. So it doesn't take me as long, and I don't like hold on to it anymore. I just kind of prayed about it, turn it over to God, and then just move on and let them people deal with, if they don't want to say they're sorry, if they don't want to admit that they were wrong, then that's okay. You're
Eh, eh,
never going to get,
yeah.
you keep seeking for something that you're never going to get.
Yeah.
And it
And
just causes more damage, I
how
think.
often have we been wounded where somebody actually came and made amends? That's probably
Mm-hmm.
10%.
Mm-hmm.
90% of the people that wound us
Mm-hmm.
never either get the chance or never care.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so, yeah, our expectations have to drop.
Yeah.
You know, you want to piss a Christian off. Those hyper religious Christians, they want to be like Jesus, right? I'm just trying to be like Jesus. I just try to emulate Jesus, except they don't like that part where Jesus forgives us all.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to be like Jesus, you have to forgive. And I've heard them say, well, only Jesus can forgive that.
Mm-hmm.
Or, well, I'm not Jesus. You know, you want me to forgive, but I'm not Jesus. Well, you said you want to be like Jesus. This guy was hanging on a cross saying, Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're
To
doing.
doing. Uh-huh.
And doesn't mean that's easy for us. And it doesn't mean like like a button flips and we
We
get
just,
it,
yeah.
but it means that's what we should aspire to
Mm-hmm.
do, right? But
Yeah,
it's hard.
exactly. Yeah.
And so the answer, or the question is, can unforgiveness open us up to the demonic? The simple answer is yes, but it's a very complex concept and it's very sensitive. So we want to
Mm-hmm.
be mindful of that. But I'm going to give you some verses, and because we try to, not just talk about what we know, we try to
Mm-hmm.
use this Bible that
Oh,
God
yeah.
blessed us with to kind of talk about the subjects that we cover. And so let's talk about it. Let's just go through a few of these. Colossians 3:13 says, "Bear with each other and forgive one another. If any of you has a grievance against someone, forgive as the Lord forgave you." And again, if somebody just went through some traumatic experience, you probably don't want to slap Colossians 3:13 on them the first day.
Day.
But
Mhm.
if you're praying with somebody, or if you're listening to this and you feel that unforgiveness is something you struggle with,
Mhm.
meditate on that passage.
Mhm.
God is telling us to forgive because, he forgave us first, but more importantly, he understands the power of forgiveness versus the power of unforgiveness, which is why he chose to forgive his enemies on earth.
Mhm.
Because you think about it, he was God. He could have just incinerated them and said, anybody else want a chance?
Mhm.
But he didn't, because he's showing us the power, the true power was in unforgiveness. And, historically, there's a story of one of the men that was crucifying Jesus. They said he is a man who stabbed Jesus, in between the ribs where the water came out of his side. History tells us that that man went on to be a Christian because he sat there and watched this God forgive them, including
Mhm. Yeah.
him, who was persecuting him. And so it had more power than if Jesus would have just said, spit on all of them or whatever.
Mhm.
And so there is power in it. Let's go to Mark 11:25. It says, and when you stand praying, if you hold anything against anyone, forgive them, so your Father in heaven may forgive you of your sins. Now, this gets a little deeper, because if you're praying and you're, during your prayer time, or, in your spirit, you feel that, like, I'm praying, but I still hold this unforgiveness towards this person. It says, stop what you're doing, forgive that person, so that your God may forgive you. So
Mhm.
listen, like, put a word picture here. God, please forgive me of my sins. In your mind pops up, you want forgiveness for your sins, but you won't forgive Melissa for, eating all the popcorn when you went to the bathroom. But you have to forgive Melissa first before you want me to forgive you.
Mhm.
That's literally what Jesus is saying, is like, you want forgiveness, you have to practice it yourself. Luke 6:37. Do not judge, and you will not be judged. Do not condemn, and you will not be condemned. Forgive, and you will be forgiven. So again, it's all part of, if you want something for yourself, you have
Mhm.
to first give it. And what Jesus is doing there, we always talk about doors, Melissa, about, like,
Mhm.
you open doors to the demonic. Well, these are doors you open to Jesus.
Mhm.
So Jesus looks
Yeah.
down and says, you're trying to gain access to me at these deeper levels, but what's hindering that is your unforgiveness
Mhm.
and your judgmentalism in this passage and your condemnation of others. But if you will simply do these things, not only will I do them for you, but now you're getting closer to me. And so if you really know those really strong Christian people that are not religious, but they're good-hearted,
Mhm.
strong, loving people, they're easy to forgive, they're slow to condemn, and they're slow to judge, because they've understood how you get close to Jesus.
Mhm.
Now let's go to Matthew 18. And Matthew 18 is one of the very richest passages in the Bible. Matthew 18 in other verses talks about how you resolve conflict. So
Mhm.
it's a big passage when it comes to, like, human interactions. And it says in Matthew 18:21 and 22, then Peter came to Jesus and asked, Lord, how many times shall I forgive my brother or sister who sins against me? Up to 7 times? And Jesus answered, I tell you, not 7 times, but 77
77 times.
times. And some translations say 70 times 7. So it's a lot of times.
Mhm.
So you should continue to forgive people. And what's your response to that? Well, how can I do that? Well, the response to that is, well, don't you have a sin or two in your life that you keep messing up, you can't seem to master,
Mhm.
and Jesus keeps forgiving you? Well, that's what he's saying. Let's go to Ephesians 4:31 and 32. Let all bitterness and wrath and anger and clamor and slander be put away from you, along with all malice. Be kind to one another, tender-hearted, forgiving one another, as God in Christ forgave you.
Mhm.
Getting deep. Let's do a couple more. So Luke 23:34 says, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they're doing. Again, here's this Jesus guy on a cross saying, forgive me. or forgive them.
Mm-hmm.
And when you think about how crazy that is, you think about how, like, what it would have taken for Jesus. And then we want to say, well, he wasn't like us. So, like, for me, that would be harder for him. Well, he was fully human,
Mm-hmm.
remember?
Yeah.
So when you hear that, Melissa, like think about, like, when you're first in the midst of whatever somebody did to you, and then some Christian comes along and says, hey, you just need to forgive, like how hard that would have been. And then they throw that passage in your face. But that's a passage that you need to kind of resolve in your spirit over time.
Mm-hmm.
Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, I agree. And I do agree. And I have only experienced this once, to have someone to actually tell me to my face that they forgave me for something that I felt like I didn't deserve to be forgiven for. And it just kind of made me feel like, I try to be a really good person. I say, okay, God, it was good today. You take a token. And then, like, the other day when we were out working, and now it's like deer season. So, they're out mating. So all the deers are out. And I said a big prayer for for us and our teammates when we're out, working, just traveling on the roads, because the deers are like everywhere,
Yeah,
just to,
where we go, you're going to see 5 deer a night for sure.
yeah. So just to protect us from, and you see deers, on side of the road, and cars pulled over from getting injured, from running over deer. And so I said a prayer, on our way as we were all leaving. And that later that night, a big buck, probably like an 8-pointer, 9-pointer, just ran in front of my car. And it was so close, like I saw his eyeball, and I was like, oh my God, thank you. Okay, so here's another token, So it just makes your life easier. I think it's kind of hard to explain for me, but I have learned how to forgive people easier, because it just makes me a happy person, and it just makes my soul feel, you know, open and alive and light and fluffy. It's not as heavy, and there's just it's you just have to let it go and just forgive them and move on. It's just an amazing thing. But to experience that so far once in my life, to have someone to tell me face to face that they've forgiven me for something, just changed my life
Yeah.
a lot. It just made me closer to God, that actually it does work. They forgave me because I forgave someone else for their sins, because I wanted someone to forgive me. And I may screw up again down the road. You never know.
Well,
Hopefully not, but
well,
just any little thing,
as long as it's not directed
judgment.
towards me, I'm
Yeah.
good. I'm kidding. Well, that kind of ties into this passage. Now, this is something what I was praying about the podcast that kind of popped into my head. So we'll add this here, and then we'll jump to the story. But it kind of goes with what you were just saying. So again, word picture. We're in the Bible. We're in Luke chapter 7. We're going to go through verses 40 through 47. But let's paint a word picture. So Jesus is talking with his disciples, and there's a disciple named Simon, who he would later call Peter.
Mm-hmm.
And they're having a discussion about this topic. And listen to what Jesus says. So starting in verse 40, it says, and Jesus answering said to Simon, Simon, I have something to say to you. And he answered, say it, teacher. And Jesus tells a parable. He says, a certain moneylender had 2 debtors. One owed 500 denarii and the other 50. When they couldn't pay, he canceled the debt of both. Now, which of them will love him more? Simon answered, the one, I suppose, for whom he canceled the larger debt. And he said to him, you have judged rightly. Then turning towards the woman, he said to Simon, do you see this woman? I entered the house. You gave me no water for my feet, but she has wet my feet with her tears and wiped them with her hair. You gave me no kiss, but from the time I came in, she has not ceased to kiss my feet. You did not anoint my head with oil, but she has anointed my feet with ointment. Therefore I tell you, her sins, which are many, are forgiven, for she loved much. But he who is forgiven little loves little. Now, there's a lot of doctrine in here.
Yeah.
If you are listening, even if you're a non-Christian, this is one of those Bible passages where I think you, even if you're
Mhm.
not a believer, you would say there's a lot of wisdom in
Oh,
this.
yeah. Oh, yeah.
And
For
the
sure.
story, again, in the word picture, because I wanted to take you macro
Mhm.
or micro, so then we can pull out and see this macro. There's this woman who's kicking it with the disciples, or this woman just walks in and goes over and starts kissing Jesus's feet. Now, she is not a moral, upstanding person,
Mhm.
and everybody in the community knows she's a tramp.
Mhm.
She's a whore. Um, and all of these religious people and the disciples are like, hey, get this lady out of here.
Yeah.
Like, this is bad for business, man. This is bad
Mhm.
optics here. And so Jesus says, hey, let me kind of give you some wisdom here.
Mhm.
And what he says is, you guys are hanging out with me. Really, you don't even know who I am,
Mhm.
because this woman has come in and found me and is literally worshiping at my
Mhm.
feet with her every emotion, every part of her soul, begging for forgiveness, begging for, I would say, relief from the weight of her sin, to
Mhm.
where she's crying, wiping his feet with her hair, brings expensive ointment and anoints his feet. And these people are walking on these dirt roads. They didn't take baths very much. So ointment was a commodity, and
Mhm.
she poured a whole tons of money worth of ointment onto his feet. And so Jesus is saying, do you understand forgiveness here?
Mhm.
If you have a lot to be forgiven, you love the person who's forgiving you more than if you have little. And that's where
Mhm.
you religious people, if you're still sticking around, we usually piss you off about 4 minutes, 5 minutes in. But if you're still sticking around, that's why you don't have a lot of love
Mhm.
for what I would call the unlovable, the
Mhm.
addicts, the prostitutes, the felons, the people that we hope find our podcast,
Mhm.
because you probably lived, no offense, with that silver spoon, the spiritual silver spoon in your mouth, and you haven't lived where these people lived, and then
Mhm.
your logic becomes, well, that's because I made better choices, or maybe it's because you lived in a different set of circumstances.
Mhm.
you know you grew up in a suburban neighborhood with Christian parents who loved you, who
Mhm.
read to you, who tucked you in, who prayed with you, who taught you right from wrong. And instead of you seeing that as a blessing, you put yourself on a
Pedestal.
pedestal
Oh,
when you
yeah.
look down on somebody. But that's that's because you haven't been forgiven a lot.
Mhm.
And does that make me better? Does that make Melissa better? No,
Mhm.
but it's a perspective thing. I've been forgiven big time.
Mhm.
Uh, and that's why I kind of love the unlovable people, because
Mhm.
I'm one of you.
Mhm.
You know, I am a minister who's fallen from grace, which is probably the biggest harlot of all, because you should never speak of Jesus again. You shouldn't be in ministry
Mhm.
again. You should go curl up in a ball and shoot yourself in the face so you can rid us all of your dirty filthiness.
Mhm.
But it takes people who've been where you've been sometimes to
Mhm.
help you. And
Mhm.
so that's why I don't really fit in a lot with churches, especially with hyper religious churches,
Mhm.
because it's not that I'm not a hypocrite, but I see the hypocrisy in those churches. And I'm like, man, if somebody really needed Jesus, this is the last place I would send them.
Mhm.
The last place. I'd rather send you to an inner city church where there's addicts getting high in front of the church building
Mhm.
than to send them to this place where God supposedly, is blessing all of these people that don't really know what forgiveness is.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
so a church
Agree.
to me, should always be a hospital for the sick,
Exactly.
but,
Mhm.
what do I know? So what we want to do is just kind of give you this thing where we want you to say, when someone sins against us or sins against me, I understand it's hard, especially if somebody sins against us in a heinous way, but we don't want to be in that place where we start wanting to take the vengeance on them ourselves, whether that be literally, physically,
Mm-hmm.
or just putting all that negative, wishing, prayerful energy towards their demise
Mm-hmm.
instead of truly giving it to Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
Because the horizontal consequences of people's sin is never going to be enough for a victim.
Yeah.
And it's always going to be too much for the perpetrator.
Mm-hmm.
But God is the one that knows the right justice for the set of circumstances. And that's why we have to put that in his hands.
Mm-hmm.
And then God isn't going to let people off the hook.
Oh no.
They may
They're
look
gonna-
like for many years, but it will come back around.
Oh yeah.
That's what we believe here.
Yeah.
So what we want to do is, if you understand that Jesus tells us to forgive so we could be free, let him
Mhm.
handle things, easier said than done. Now, that leads us to the story that we want to tell you of this man who wrote in. And it's a story of deliverance ministry, because this man claims that a demonic possession occurred in his life. He stated that the deliverance ministry he worked with helped him to get rid of some of his unforgiveness.
Mhm.
And so I love this story. Can get a little creepy in the middle here, but let's get to a letter from a man named Gerald. So you ready?
Ready.
Okay, so he says, Anthony and Melissa, hey guys, my name is Gerald, and I've recently found your podcast. I really appreciate what you both are doing, and I wish I would have found you 4 years ago. It may have saved me a whole lot of trouble. So, about 4 years ago, I found myself in a very dangerous situation. When I say dangerous, I mean I was possessed by a demon and was on a path that could have led to unimaginable chaos. And when I read that first, Melissa, I don't know when
Mhm.
you read it, because we read it at separate times. Um, my mind started going about, like, what could that have been? Like, he seems like he's on a path
Uh-huh.
that could have been bad, and he kind of alludes to it here. But the weight of that sentence kind of hit me.
Mhm.
So he goes on to say, as it is, I found myself in a situation where I caused some issues in my marriage and scared my wife. I know you said that these things usually take a long time to evolve, but mine seem to progress pretty quickly. And let's clarify there. I would say most times a demonic possession takes a long time to evolve. Are there cases where something can happen very quickly? Yes.
Mhm.
And maybe we weren't clear on that in some of our previous discussions. If you choose today to, do something crazy and start, following Satan, it can happen pretty quickly. But on the same token, Gerald, I would still argue a little bit that the demon has been working on you, me, and everybody for a long time. And they're waiting for the right set of
Oh yeah.
circumstances. And so
Mhm.
they were probably knocking on doors your whole life. The only difference is you kind of had them closed.
Mhm.
And whenever this circumstance popped up,
Up
then you
and
flung the door open. So it did progress quickly, but on the same token, they've been lurking.
Mhm.
So hopefully that kind of makes some sense into
Yeah.
what we believe versus what he's saying, because I
Mhm.
agree with him.
Yeah.
It probably progressed very quickly.
Mhm.
Now, he said, shortly before all this happened, we had a family tragedy. My stepfather severely wounded my mother in a domestic assault. So again, let's pause. What we were just talking about.
Mhm.
Somebody steals $5 out of your purse, easy to forgive. Somebody beats up your mother
Then
and severely wounds them, whatever that means.
Mhm.
I'm a man. You hurt my mother, you better start driving, right? And so I can kind of
Oh
hear
yeah.
that in his statement. So
Mhm.
he goes on to say she was in the hospital for about 4 days, and we are just blessed that she did not die. So this was big. This was
Mhm.
severe. Needless to say, me and my brother were livid. I actually went looking for him, but I could not find him. It's probably good that I didn't. And
See, God
again,
was looking out for
I
him
get it,
because
Gerald. I get it.
he would have snapped, would have just went blind
This
and
guy
just
telling you
in
to
rage.
forgive and preaching deliverance would
Mhm.
probably have been in the car as
Mhm.
well. So,
Exactly. Oh yeah.
for sure. The police eventually arrested him, and we assumed that he would be harshly punished. Ouch. What did you say earlier about, like, your perceptions of what it's never going to be as bad as we want it to be?
Mhm.
Yeah, that's
The
what
punish.
just
Yeah.
happened here, because you can tell by the way he worded that. So, of course, he got a very light sentence and barely did any jail time. Sorry for that, Gerald. That's awful. If that wasn't bad enough, we got my mom away from him, but in the process, she told us about everything that she had endured. And that's where this gets harder, because they knew about the event, but your brain doesn't go to, well, if this is what set this off, what else has been going on? Well, they got the answers. I won't lie. I wanted to kill him. That's Gerald's words. My mom, who is a religious woman, tried to get us to pray for him. So here we go, right? So mom's saying, you guys need to pray for him. And we're kids going, nope. I'm going to go find him. So he goes on to say, I lost it.
Oh, yeah.
There was no way that I was going to pray for him. I started to think negative thoughts about God. I actually started to build resentment for a God that would allow this to happen to my mother, who was such a faithful Christian. I eventually stated out loud in an angry tirade that there was no God.
That's when it jumped in.
Yeah, and that's what he says.
That's what happened.
It was almost instantly that I felt something enter me. Now, I'm going to pause here. One of the questions that I would say in the top 10 of every question I've ever been asked as a deliverance minister, how do you know when you're possessed? I would say almost everybody I've ever talked to without prompting has worded to me in some way, shape, or form. I felt like it was around me. And then all of a sudden I felt when it came into me, or I felt like it took over me. They'll use words like that, but I would say, you know. So when you're feeling it around you, if you're listening to this and you want to know how this progresses, when you're feeling it around you, you need to get into prayer. You need to find a deliverance minister, because that's what it's trying to do. It's trying to go from the outside to the inside. And once it's inside, we can help you. Deliverance ministry can help you, but it's way harder. It's going to require a lot more. So he says, I felt something enter me. I knew in that moment that this was probably a demon, but I didn't care. And that's what it'll do. It'll wear you down to where it'll almost make a deal with you. Like, or it's almost like you just finally surrender and just open the door and say, come in, I don't care.
Because you're so angry because you want to hurt the person that hurt the person that you loved, his mom. So he was just
maybe the demon
enraged.
can help you.
Oh, yeah, exactly.
Or maybe that's what you want.
Yeah, because the demon is going to like, yeah, this is what you should do. You should want to kill him. You should want to hurt him. You should want to put him in the hospital for 4 days. Like
your mom's saying pray.
Yeah.
But I'm saying, let's go get him. Yeah, that's the demon talking, by the way. So he says, I didn't care. I spiraled so far out of control at that point. I felt like I was no longer in control. I get that. So you're spiraling, and all of a sudden you're not at the wheel anymore. I began to hear voices telling me to go and kill my stepfather, which is what demons will do. I began to obsess about it. In reality, it was a dangerous situation, because I feel like I was progressing to a place where I may have hurt him if I saw him. And remember, Melissa, at the beginning of the letter, he tried to tell us like about this danger that everybody was in. Well, now he's telling you what it was. He says, my family began to tell me that I was changing. Anytime my wife or my mom tried to tell me that I was different, I would fly off the handle in a rage. Now, let's pause here again. A lot of times, when people are addicted to drug, alcohol, they're doing something, and you tell them, hey, like you're hurting us, or you're wounding us, or you're acting different, something's not right. You'll see people get really angry. There's a demon behind that. Doesn't mean they're possessed, but it does mean that there's a demon that's been working on them. And that demon's the one that's influencing them or possessing them to turn around and say, get away from me, push these people farther away, because the demon doesn't want their work to be hindered.
Yeah.
Right. So he says, my wife and I began to fight. Most people wouldn't believe this, but one day during a huge fight, I told my wife to shut up. And then a very heavy coaster flew off the coffee table and almost hit her in the head. We believe you, Gerald. We believe you. Seen it many times. My memory about this event is fuzzy, but my wife said that I just laughed and left the house for 3 days. I can tell you honestly that I do not remember ever leaving the house that day. As I said, I wasn't in control. Now,
wow.
This is, if you're listening, if that didn't scare you, it should scare you, because what did he do for 3 days? What was he doing? Was he looking for this man? Was, by the grace of God, didn't find him? Was he, you know,
Getting his shotguns ready, cleaning
yeah.
his rifles, and
Was he
just
laying in a corner somewhere, just getting fully
full of
possessed by
yes.
this demon, like just
Hmm.
tearing his soul apart,
Or just
plotting,
thinking about his mom, what she went through, and
plotting who else
what's
he
he's
was going to
gonna.
kill?
Mm-hmm.
Think about that. It's
Mm-hmm.
crazy. To make a long story short, I had a moment of reprieve, and my mom convinced me to go and see her pastor. I met in his office, and a ministry team prayed for me over 3 hours. Melissa, I love this part because, the movies, and let me not pick on movies, because we have, as a ministry team, gone to people's home lots of times. But the best thing to do is get them in the office with the ministry team. If you ever find a deliverance minister who's just out there showing up to people's houses by themselves, that's a dangerous situation. You should always take people
Mm-hmm.
with you, or at least try to get them. And it's not that the church is, like the Catholics believe, and I don't mean to be disrespectful, but this holy ground thing, holy ground is where you invite Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
And so their own home could be holy ground if you pray and welcome the Spirit there.
Mm-hmm.
But I love that he came to the church, where this ministry team, in an environment where they can kind of be in control a little
Yeah.
more. They prayed for him for 3 hours. Again, he says, I have a sketchy memory about this time, but I was told that when the pastor rebuked a spirit of unforgiveness, I screamed and then began coughing uncontrollably. If you go back to some of our previous episodes, we've talked about one of the things I've always looked for many years of somebody who's possessed is coughing.
Yeah.
They can't get words out. They're starting to talk to you, and all of a sudden they cough like uncontrollably. They don't have a cold. They don't have COVID.
Mm-hmm.
They're fine, and then they're coughing. It's something physically that happens when a demon is possessing a person.
Mm-hmm.
And I also love the fact in this sentence where he said this preacher, or this deliverance minister, is uh, taking the time to just kind of rebuke the specific spirit that
Mm-hmm.
he believed, and probably through conversation
Yeah.
was able to
Exactly.
recognize that this was a spirit of unforgiveness. And when he
Mm-hmm.
did that, kind of hit the mark,
Mm-hmm.
right? The Catholics, and we talk about this a lot. The Catholics are real big into trying to identify the name of the demon, and whether the demon's name is blah, 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 blah. What we really need to work on is if he is a spirit of unforgiveness, or if
Mm.
he is a
Oh
spirit of
yeah.
depression,
Okay.
or if he is a spirit of murder, because there's not just one spirit of murder. There's spirits, multiple names, that's their purpose, or
Mm-hmm.
that's their goal, if you will. And so rebuking them by their actions is just as good as rebuking them by their title.
Mm-hmm.
Even though in my books, I always try to find some crazy names for demons because it tells a good story, right?
Right.
So he says that, this priest, so he goes, so he says, let me go back to here. He says, so he rebuked the spirit of unforgiveness. I screamed and then began coughing uncontrollably. When I felt the demon leave, I felt an overwhelming weight lift from my body. I worked with that pastor for weeks on forgiveness, and can now say that I have no further issues, which is great. I
Mm-hmm.
love the fact that the pastor kept working with you and didn't send you
Exactly.
back to your
Just.
situation,
Mm-hmm.
because the demon could come back, um, and continue to try to wreak havoc. So he says, I'm even a greeter at the very church that helped to save my life. I love this part.
Mm-hmm.
I've been blessed to share my testimony at this church since we are very active in deliverance ministry. My story has helped me to see the value of forgiveness. I just thought that your listeners could benefit from knowing that demons are real, and unforgiveness is a portal they use to gain entry. Thanks again for all you're doing. I will pray for you, and I'm going to try to join Patreon to hear some of your bonus content. I have also started to listen to your first book, The Struggle, on your other podcast. It is very scary, and I have to take it in small doses. No offense, but it can be a trigger to someone who has been where I've been, and I
Oh
totally
yeah.
get
Get
that.
that. Yeah.
And
Well, thank
maybe we
you.
should, yeah, we should address that in a second. But he says, blessings to both of you and your ministry, Gerald. And so let's address that first. So yeah, A lot of times I get stuff from Christians, grief, that I've wrote horror novels.
Mm-hmm.
And the purpose of those novels is not to glorify demons, which I've been accused of. The purpose, if you read it, I usually feel that if people have really read them, they don't say that. They read the first chapter and think I'm just telling another ghost story or demon
Mm-hmm.
story. There's the gospel throughout those books,
Mm-hmm.
big time.
Oh yeah.
And it was written so people who are intrigued with the paranormal or horror to get a version of deliverance ministry versus what is mostly out there in movies, which is Catholic kind of priests coming in,
Mm-hmm.
but deliverance ministry is a very different, ministry.
Mm-hmm.
And so you don't really get that a lot in movies and
Mm-hmm.
books. So there should be some sort of warning, for people who are struggling with deliverance, ministry aftermath, or
Mm-hmm.
people who are, who have had a pretty severe demonic attack in their past. You should probably read those at your own discretion,
Mm-hmm.
because
Maybe in the park in the sunlight.
yeah, definitely don't be
On a
reading them at
nice-
night by yourself, because they can be pretty terrifying,
Yeah.
to be honest. Um, so what I want to do is kind of go back to what the main topic of this is. And what that is that we need to really look at how unforgiveness can kind of lead us down this path.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody that's listening, I don't believe anyway, would say that Gerald was wrong
Mm-mm.
in what he
It's
was
his
feeling
feeling.
in
Oh,
terms of
yeah.
his humanness.
Mm-hmm.
Any of us, especially men, who I believe to some regards God has designed us to be protectors.
Mm-hmm.
And so where is that line, of
Mm-hmm.
I need to protect my mom versus I'm going to go kill the guy?
Mm-hmm.
It can progress pretty quickly. And if he would have went and killed the guy, many people would say, I get it, justify it, but he would have went to prison.
Oh yeah, it's just like with domestic violence, when the woman finally has had enough after 15 years of it, and then they go and kill the spouse, in self-defense, not just go and shoot him in his sleep, but if they're having a fight or whatever and she's trying to save her life and then she accidentally kills him, then she's going to go to prison
Yeah.
because,
Unless
he's
she's
been
got a good lawyer. Yeah.
So yeah.
It's kind
Like
of one of
human
those
nature.
things where like you really have to say, like the line, because it's so blurry, that's why you have to give these things to God. I think
Mhm.
that's what God is saying. He's saying, this is too much for you.
Yeah,
I didn't
exactly.
design
Telling
this
you.
world.
Mhm.
I didn't design this world for you humans to have to deal with this, but because sin entered the world,
Mhm.
I've made a way for me to kind of handle these things because you're not really built for this. And so, although, again, nobody would fault Gerald for his feelings, it would have been a victory from the devil because he would be in prison. It
Mhm.
didn't help his mom at all to now have a son who's in
Yeah,
prison,
exactly.
and
Yeah.
nobody wins. Yes, the man is dead, but it's not like it's a final solution.
Yeah, because
It's
the
not like,
damage didn't go away. The
yeah,
damage, still there.
yeah,
That was done. You know
yeah,
what I mean?
yeah, yeah. As a matter of fact, you've compounded your mom's issues.
Mhm.
And if you truly love her, this is where it gets tricky, because if you truly love her, you should spend your energy taking care of her.
Mhm.
But that instinct of a man, and so I don't fault Gerald. I totally understand how he got where he was. And I think a lot of men would be in the same situation. But um, it's funny how he must have beat up the mom pretty good, or something crazy happened to where he went from I'm going to go beat him up to I'm going to kill him.
Mhm.
So and I think it says in the letter that the mom almost died. So this was severe, but it's funny how it's like how we progress to that. And so on much lesser levels, all of us can learn from this letter.
Mhm.
So if you have, so I'll tell like a brief thing. I have a family member who abused a lot of us when we were kids. It's not as severe as some of you would think when I say that, but it was severe in a way that it was just kind of a habit for this kind of male uncle of ours to kind of select boys and torture us kind of in different ways.
Mhm.
And my mother still struggles with this person because this person's still in our lives. I've distanced myself, but when it's a relative or when it's the husband of your sister, let's put it that way, you still have to see these people on holidays and, because you share a family member, right? So I'm distant, so I can just disappear, but it's harder for my mother. And these people still pop around. And what's hard for her is this person hasn't really changed his attitude. There's no repentance in him at all. And it's what you were saying earlier, Melissa, is we're never going to get an apology from this guy.
Yeah.
I mean, if I did, I probably wouldn't know how to take it. That may trigger me to punch him instead of just forgiving and moving on. It like, don't bring it up. I've already gotten over it type of thing.
Yeah.
But when you know this person is unrepentant and they're not only unrepentant, but they continue to do this type of stuff. And, my only solace is it's out there. So if he's continuing to do this to other people, everybody knows what he's about. So if you continue to allow your kids around him, you can't blame Anthony anyway. So what I would say is, for the most part, we need to kind of get to a place where we kind of give this stuff to God. And so that's kind of what I've done. And, it's what my mother struggles to do, because you give it to God and then he does something else and you want to pick it back up. But what other choice do I have? If this person ever calls to apologize to me, I don't know what I would do, because I have literally made up my mind that I'm never going to get it. And it's God's now. And that's probably what I would say is, I gave that to God. You have to work that out with him.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Well,
exactly.
You and I will, there's nothing you could do where you and I will ever be cool, because the damage is done. But I gave that to God. So go work that out with him. And then maybe one day in heaven, I'll see you there. And, it's something we could work out there where it doesn't matter anymore.
Right.
But for now, that's between you and God, because I had to give that over because it was consuming me in a lot of different ways and led me to do a lot of crazy things. And so I can kind of relate to Gerald a little bit, because there were times in my life where I was like, well, if we're never going to get an apology for this guy, and I heard he did this to this person and this person as well, I'll go take care of it. But, by the grace of God, I think I had some sense. Even, sometimes I can have a little less than other times. That was just something that I knew was not beneficial to any of us.
Yeah.
And
well, I'm going to say something, and maybe you
go for it.
May take this out or not, but being out of a domestic violence marriage and a relationship, I would say to women or even to men, like, the mother disclosed other things that was done to her by the stepfather or by her husband. Just be careful when you start telling things that has been happening over the years that the kids didn't know about, because it's going to put them in this rage that the son went into, the rage that he was in, because they only saw, or either they kind of knew something was going on but didn't realize that it was that bad. Like, I don't even talk about the things that my ex-husband did to me, like, even to this day. And I've been divorced almost 19 years, because I didn't want my brothers or my male cousins to go over, all three of them and kill him and beat him up, and especially if you're still in the relationship. But when you're finally out of it, like you said, I just gave it over to God. I've been praying about it. It took me 9 and 10 years to get over everything. And to this day, I really don't even talk about the things that was done, because it's going to trigger them and it's going to make them more angry and unforgiving even more. And that's just going to add more burden to them. Does that make sense?
It does. And I think, it's one of those case by case scenarios.
Right.
And definitely what I kind of, agree with, because there's parts of it that I think it's just over time. But, depending on who your sons are. So in your case, who your brothers are, who your cousins are, versus, who you would share it with, I think is a better way to look at it. So if you're going to disclose something like that, who you choose to tell to get your needs met versus who you choose to tell that's going to forget your needs and make it about themselves. And so, and Gerald, please hear this with the kindest of hearts.
Oh, yes.
You made this about yourself versus about your mother. What your mother needed was you to love on her, not to want to kill him. And again, please hear me, brother. I would have done the same thing you did.
Oh,
There's
yeah.
no judgment in what I'm saying,
Exactly.
but in
None.
hindsight, I bet you would agree with me.
Mhm.
So if one of my daughters came and disclosed something to me, I would hope that I would have the sense to say, okay, what does my daughter need before I go handle this?
Mhm.
But what I'm also saying is, and what Melissa's saying is maybe my daughter should tell somebody else first.
Mhm.
And then
Yeah.
maybe they should break it to me gently after things have been handled. Or maybe my daughter needs to come to me and say, you're going to want it to make this about you. But if you love me, you're going to put all your feelings aside
Mhm.
and just help me,
Mhm. Yeah.
because that might stop me from going,
Yeah,
okay,
the
let me go
approach.
get this
Yeah,
fool.
exactly. Because
Yeah.
it affects so many other people.
But
Yeah.
I think that gives us a great conclusion here, Melissa, what you just said, because it's too gray of an area. It's too
Mhm.
complex. And I think we
Mhm.
worded that earlier. This is a complex situation. And so that's why it has to be God's,
Mhm. Mhm.
So like, uh, because the devil in the gray of all of this and
Mhm.
in the extreme emotions of all of this is going to go, there's my chance to get in.
Yep.
I'm going to play on this guy's manhood. I'm going to play on this guy's anger. I'm going to play on his guilt, feeling guilty for not being there for his mom, all of
Mhm.
those things. And then I'm going to get in there. And
Mhm.
then I'm going to cause him havoc. I'm going to cause this other guy
And
havoc,
his wife
who
and his relationship,
we've been
destroy
working
his
on the
marriage.
stepfather.
Mhm.
So we're going
Oh,
to take
yeah.
him out this way. We're going to take Gerald out that way. And then we'll sit back and laugh as the family is even bigger turmoil
Mhm.
than what originally started when mom came and disclosed this,
Mhm.
or when mom
Yeah.
went to the hospital.
Yeah.
And so hopefully in the spookiness of Gerald's story, there's a lesson there. And that lesson is that the demons will use any negative emotions we have to
Mhm.
manifest, to build, to grow in your life, to eventually oppress you to a place where you give in, and then they'll possess you. That's their goal, to kill, steal, and destroy. John 10:10. Probably hear it
Mhm.
every episode, and you'll probably hear it every episode going forth. That's what this is about. But if you hear the shepherd's voice
Mhm.
and you go to him through that gate, as it says in John 10, that's where you're going to find Jesus. And so trying to go through other doors and trying to go through other methods, you're
Mhm.
just allowing the demons to
Exactly.
come
Yeah.
in and control your life. And
Yep.
it doesn't always look like Gerald's story, but it can start very much on a very innocent little thing, like being depressed and doing a Ouija board,
Mhm.
being depressed and feeling lonely and finding friends that introduce you to witchcraft
Mhm.
or something of that nature could lead you down a path. I recently had somebody who I think is a seeker ask me, what does the Christianity say about tarot cards? And I said, well, tells you not to do them.
Mhm.
Well, I bought a deck of tarot cards. Okay. Well, why are you asking me? Well, is it right or wrong? Well, I already gave you the answer, but it opens you up to things.
Mhm.
Well, we've been doing readings and we've been doing this and that, and we've been, blah, 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 blah. So I said, well, just be careful, but I've already given
Exactly.
you the answer. I didn't beat
Yeah.
him to death, whatever. And that's that.
Mhm.
So hopefully that kind of helps any of you. If you feel like you've had any unforgiveness and you want to write to us about that, or if you're struggling,
Mhm.
or if it's another topic, you feel you have some spiritual warfare going on
Mhm.
in another direction, just reach out to us. You could find us at the Deliverance Project Podcast at gmail.com. You could write us a letter. You can request to do an interview. You could send us an audio file, however
Mhm.
you want to reach out to us. And if you don't want to be on the podcast, but you need help, we are going to be there for you as
Mhm.
well. So this program is written and produced by us, Anthony and Melissa Corelli. The voiceover and music is produced by Todd K. Voiceovers. This program is copyright The Struggle, LLC. And to find out more about us, please again visit thestruggleseries.com. If you have a story you'd like to share, we told you how to do that. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time. We definitely hope to see you soon. You take care.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you for listening to The Deliverance Project. Make sure to subscribe, tell your friends, and we will see you next time.